At the end of 2020, we implemented 2 projects relating to mental health for newcomers that built on some ongoing research we had been conducting at TIES. The first project is called Immigrant Family-Based Interpreters Emotional Wellness Supports and aims to introduce information to better support children and youth who are providing interpretation and translation for family members. The second project is called Pedagogy-based Emotional and Mental Wellness Intervention Pilot for Newcomers, which intends to infuse culturally safe emotional wellness pedagogy into the teaching, classroom management, and lesson planning at settlement agencies. So these 2 projects were funded through the City of Calgary's Change Can't Wait initiative, which aims at supporting innovative new efforts and programming for Calgarians struggling with mental health and addiction. Our 2 projects were amongst the 31 that the city funded in 2 rounds in 2020. So these 31 projects will inform the development of the Community Action on Mental Health and Addiction Strategy for Calgary.
Although federally and provincially funded language and settlement services provided by community agencies do offer some support, newcomer families often rely on family members for translation and interpretation. It is quite common for newcomer parents to rely on their minor children for linguistic translation and interpretation in various contexts, such as medical, legal, and educational contexts. This practice is known as child language brokering, and this is coined by applied linguist Lucy C. in the 1990s. The current research body study mostly on Latin and Asian Americans in the United States revealed that child language brokering is critical to newcomer parents because they depend on their children to navigate through a new country, culture, and language. Literature also suggests that parents rely on their children because child language brokering, in their perspective, is viewed as the children's duty or responsibility to the family. And moreover, parents tend to feel more comfortable to have their children broker personal material over a stranger from a community agency. Child language brokering can also present challenges to child brokers as they may be exposed to developmentally inappropriate materials and engage in stressful communicative situations with not only their parents, but also third-party individuals, such as a doctor, a banker, or a teacher. However, despite what previous studies showed about the negative psychosocial effects of child language brokering, the practice can encourage and strengthen personal empowerment, self-efficacy, bilingualism. Child language brokering can also mediate acculturation and communication challenges within newcomer families as the parent-child dyad engages in collaborative process meaning making. This practice can foster cultural learning as well as enhancing the communication and relational quality within newcomer families. So language brokering and cultural brokering are synonymous practices.
Basically, when we talk about emotional wellness, we're talking about how newcomers to Canada are managing the multiple emotions and experiences that accompany the process of immigration. Given these multiple transitions that newcomers must navigate when they arrive in Canada, it's to be expected that they undergo an array of emotions, both positive and negative. Helping newcomers attend to their emotional wellness means helping them cope with these multiple transitions in optimal ways to avoid the development or exacerbation of mental health challenges. In the context of the classroom, we defined emotional wellness to newcomer students as an awareness, understanding, and acceptance of emotions, the ability to manage effectively through challenges and change, and emotional literacy. Culturally responsive pedagogy centers on the importance of adjusting our teaching and learning practices to meet the needs, values, and experiences of newcomer students. Our educational system in Canada has emerged from Western ways of knowing, and in this way it is quite colonial, and this applies to English language learning as well. If teachers adjust their strategies and intervention in the classroom, they will be better positioned to offer newcomer students meaningful educational experiences, and this will increase their engagement with the class material. In the context of the classroom, we defined culturally responsive pedagogy as a student-centered approach to teaching and learning, which celebrates students' unique cultural strengths by identifying and nurturing them in order to promote their achievement and sense of well-being.
Generally, the experience of change has an impact on the emotional wellness of any individual. People usually react to changes in their lives with varying degrees of anxiety and disorientation, depending on how drastic that change might be. So as you can imagine, newcomers experience quite a bit of change. They are in an environment where they experience very many new things: language, culture, their physical surroundings. All these things are different to them. Another factor that affects newcomers is the disconnection to their social support systems. It is well established that a person's social support systems is key in managing their mental and emotional well-being. Newcomers have left this behind and can struggle to cope with the stressors of change without a social support system. Additionally, as many newcomers transition into Canada, they must adjust to the individualistic nature of our society and its many systems. This means that the usual structures in place to help them cope with changes and challenges may no longer be available. This can include the loss of family members, friends, religious and spiritual communities, to name but a few examples. So the accumulation of these losses, in addition to the multiple transitions that newcomers are facing, can have a significant impact on their emotional wellness. Language brokering is a common practice amongst immigrants and newcomers who do not speak English at home. For parents and their children, particularly their teenage children who are more functional in the language and can communicate better with adults, they are a key resource in navigating settlement processes and their new community. While an essential tool for newcomers, some of the issues that come from this practice relate to the undue anxiety and stress that it imposes on the youths. So the literature of language brokering points to benefits in the development of children, primarily in the area of self-efficacy, because they are tasked with participating and even mediating in complex adult situations, which can at times have a significant impact on their families, such as health, legal issues, education, etc. They demonstrate a higher ability to tackle complex problems in an educational context.
It is important to consider that language brokering is also cultural brokering. This means that it's not only about translation for the sake of understanding, it's also about brokering within the new Canadian culture that newcomer parents are finding themselves in. This means learning about the different systems and settings that they interact with regularly, including the medical system, the legal system, the educational system, to name but a few examples. For most newcomer families, language brokering is not a choice. It's a necessity for many parents new to Canada to be able to navigate their new life here. Our workshop initiative was intended to help English language learning teachers, settlement staff, and newcomer students understand the process of cultural language brokering, along with its psychological impact, both potential benefits and challenges associated with the practice. The psychological benefits of cultural language brokering for the child include helping one's family, becoming more responsible, and practicing bilingualism. There are also links to higher academic performance, more robust self-esteem, and greater strides in terms of identity development. The potential negative consequences of cultural language brokering include an increase in tension or stress within the family, feelings of incompetence, particularly for the parent who is in need of the practice, and a sense of burdening one's child. It also has the potential to increase anxiety or depression, to lead to more challenging adjustment, and a role reversal of some sort where the child is the one with more knowledge and skill.
You know that we work with the population that have a lot of barriers, right? So we work with the immigrant population, and especially my class is low literacy level. So which means they have 0 to 3 years of formal education, and they've been in Canada for like 6 months, from 6 months to like 3 or 4 years. So that's why they have a lot of barriers that they face with right now, like, of course, education, employment, and housing, and social barriers, and also language as well. And before the workshops, I saw that they had a lot of problems expressing themselves and accessing, regular services that are very natural to people who have been in Canada for a while. Because I'm an immigrant myself, but we came to Canada 10 years ago, and still we had those, like, a little bit of emotional trauma in the beginning. So, right. And if I look at my class right now, I have one widow with 5 kids, and I also have 4 single moms with 5+ kids. So you can imagine how many issues or, let's say, challenges they face with.
I have a student who is 56, I guess, 56 years old, a lady there. And the older, those immigrants are, and they depend on their kids, actually, especially depend on their kids for translating when they are going to see the doctors, family doctors, or even sometimes, like, like teacher parent conference as well.
I think emotional wellness, sometimes like some students, if they talk about their family members in their country, or a family member who passed away, that does trigger them sometimes. Yeah, it's a bit tough. I'm not quite sure how to respond to that. I try to empathize with them and comfort them. But yeah.
We always had students who had problems with communicating to us issues. But I also found this term around, and a few months ago, that some of their children also had issues translating, and they couldn't help their parents. A lot of the kids that came recently, they were having issues in their schools and in their ESL programs with translation. So they weren't able to help their parents, but they had other family members or roommates or people helping them. But not even a translation problem or communication. A lot of my students have a lot of mental health issues related to stress, a lot of domestic violence, especially with my female students, I've noticed, and more of that is coming out. A lot of stress related to financial problems, and also being isolated. So not only because of COVID and everything that happened, but my students, a lot of them who are coming now are also coming without their families. A lot of them are coming with their big families and 9 children and all that, but a lot of them are actually coming as single individuals who are separated from their family, or who didn't have a family in terms of an immediate family, husband or children, but have brothers and sisters that they have left behind, and they're living alone.
In our past studies, we found that newcomers primarily turn to their social circle for support during a problem. We surveyed newcomers in link classes in 4 different Western Canadian cities, and the predominant response to the question of whom they would turn to for help is that that person would be someone they trusted and were familiar with. Typically, it would be a family member or a close friend. Another thing we found was that in their settlement process, the teacher is often found to be the individual most entrusted in the system because of their daily contact and their positioning as a source of information about Canada, as well as their overall credibility as a teacher. So because these teachers are trusted, and because they operate in the front lines within the settlement system, they are often called upon by their students to address settlement issues, stressors, etc. Our research has also indicated that the teacher has often felt out of depth and that some of the demands made upon them are beyond their scope. or they are ill-prepared or ill-equipped to help their students in some of these concerns. At the same time, English language learning teachers often spend a substantial amount of time with newcomer students, so they will inevitably observe some of the distress in the classroom. English language learning teachers have the benefit of forming significant relationships with their students over time, and hence there is trust there that might not be found in other institutions or systems or individuals within the system. Students are also primarily anxious and stressed out about their classes, their progress in the settlement process, and the delays they face in getting employment. In the context of LINC, the system itself can create an added layer of stress and anxiety. Coupled with the usual hesitance newcomers have in approaching mental health professionals and other health professionals in general, we thought that it would be important to equip teachers with some knowledge and awareness about mental health and to infuse their pedagogy so that the classroom is diminished and mitigated as a contributor to settlement stress and anxiety. This is not to say that teachers are to play the role of mental health counselors, not at all. The approach we thought we'd pilot involved infusing awareness into the way teachers plan their classes, infusing key principles into their pedagogy to make the classroom more comforting to the students. We thought we'd apply some of the findings in our research in a mini intervention, which consisted of a pilot workshop for teachers. It was only 6 hours long, but it conveyed a few key concepts in an emotional wellness pedagogy for LINC. Then we tracked the implementation of some of those materials introduced in the LINC classroom itself, and then surveyed the reaction of the students.
There is a critical need to equip English language learning teachers, settlement staff, and newcomer students with key information regarding emotional wellness, culturally responsive pedagogy, and cultural language brokering. English language teachers and settlement staff come with a variety of educational and occupational backgrounds, and so they have different levels of training with respect to emotional wellness, culturally responsive pedagogy, and cultural language brokering. In a sense, the workshop series that we designed and implemented represented an important professional development opportunity for English language learning teachers and settlement staff. Community-based agencies are typically underfunded. Thus, there's a need to continue to seek grant opportunities. Obviously, the topics we're talking about today are of great importance, but they would not make their way into teacher training if the organization did not pursue and obtain additional sources of funding. When it comes to newcomer students, bringing this material into the classroom not only represents a way of increasing conversational skills on topics such as emotional wellness, culturally responsive pedagogy, and language brokering, but it also provides some foundational information that can help them as they navigate their integration into Canadian society.
So the first day of the workshop, we focused on ways in which teachers and service providers can promote emotional wellness in the classroom. By focusing on this, we were able to explore the meaning of emotional wellness, how different emotions can manifest, how we can recognize and react to distress, and then we learned about how we can identify different protective factors that students may use. We also discussed the importance of identity formation, development, and crisis. And finally, we explored the role of empathy within the classroom, and we learned about different strategies for enhancing empathy. So on the second day of the workshop, we focused on culturally responsive pedagogy. We discussed what trauma-informed care is and the ways in which we're able to understand symptoms and responses. Next, we were able to go into more detail about culturally responsive pedagogy model, what it is and how to implement it. So we gave a lot of the teachers and service providers more information about the model. Our goal for all of the workshops was to make it quite interactive. We did this by using a lot of examples because we wanted to make it very realistic for the teachers and all the service providers.
On the third and fourth day, we delivered a cultural language brokering workshop for ELL teachers and settlement workers. Attendees learned about language brokering, what it is, what it looks like, and why it happens. We also explored the impact language brokering has on newcomer families' integration experiences and discussed the positive and negative outcomes. We covered best practices and allowed attendees to apply what they learned and engage in role-playing and reflexive exercises. For example, in groups of 3, they were given a language brokering scenario and instructed to role-play within their groups. They were then asked to take turns role-playing how they would intervene if they were a service provider, parent, and child. These activities were positively received by workshop participants. Some participants even shared some of their stories and experiences with language brokering. And ultimately, this activity allowed them to understand language brokering on a deeper level and from multiple perspectives. On the 3rd day, ELL teachers received information about the Cultural Language Brokering Link module developed by the TIES research team. This allowed them to further understand the content and how it would be applied in their lesson plans and classrooms. A toolkit was also developed to enable attendees to access some practical tips that they could easily reference.
So this workshop is important for attendees as it offers the opportunity for teachers and practitioners to be able to understand some of the experiences that newcomers face, especially as they integrate into their new environment in Canada. It also offers a glimpse into their world and provides helpful information on different ways that we can work with them through their struggles. As service providers, our ability to recognize, empathize, and act can actually help in the creation of a more welcoming and inclusive environment for newcomers. It can also improve the well-being of both the attendees and the clients. The information and techniques provided in these workshops can also reduce burnout by normalizing experiences and problem-solving different ways to deal with it. It's really important to be able to recognize that nobody's struggling alone in their journey to greater well-being.
This workshop was an important learning experience for attendees because it allowed them to build their cultural competence and make them better equipped to better serve TIES clients, or more specifically, newcomer ELL clients, in a way that upholds and fosters their resiliency. I really think that this workshop will make a positive difference within TIES and impact newcomers' integration experiences.
A lot of the challenges I experienced in both creating and facilitating these workshops is the amount of information provided to participants. I believe that there are some topics that would need to be explored in greater detail. So an example of this is trauma-informed care. Many of our participants actually shared that they enjoyed this and they wanted to learn more about it. Some of the research that we read actually highlights the integral role that teachers play in the lives of newcomers. And as such, it's important that teachers be provided with more trainings and support on different topics that can increase their cultural competence and cultural humility.
One challenge I encountered as a facilitator was to take all the information we gathered and condense it into 4 days. I would have liked to do more classroom activities and elaborate more on some of the topics. I definitely think there's so much potential to turn this workshop into a course delivered over several weeks.
I found a lot of useful information for myself because, again, we are educators, we're not psychologists or psychiatrists. So thank you so much for all the information and for the presentation, the way it was presented, very interactive. Really found a lot of useful information for myself. What I remembered from the first workshop, I think it was the first one, it was a video, YouTube video that the facilitator shared with. And the name of this video was How to Practice Emotional First Aid by Guy Winch. That was like a revelation. And just talking about myself, I'm usually a very easygoing person. I don't remember any times when I was in depression. So thinking about people that are different from me is kind of difficult for me. So when I was listening to that presentation, I realized that there are people who need emotional help. And I really like that comparison that emotional trauma is similar to physical wound. It's something that should be treated seriously. It's something that should be treated, not forgotten or ignored. And I used to say, as that person mentioned, you'll come over it, you'll get over it, right? It's all in your head. Don't worry, just think positive. But it's easier to say, but more difficult to do. And yeah, my husband just kind of told me that he's the kind of person, like emotionally needy person. And after that insight, I just try to be more attentive to and on guard, let's say, to the emotional trauma and problems that my students might have. Talking about language broker, and I'll tell you about one instance. That's what happened just a couple of days ago. I have a student who has some financial issues with Alberta Works, and this is not part of our work, right? So I can just tell her, if you need a letter, talk to the managers or to coordinators, they will give you a letter for Alberta Works. But the situation where I and her kids got involved in was the following. So her kids called me out of the school hours on my phone. I remembered what we were told during the workshop, that we need to help those kids, right? It's not their job, it's not their responsibility, it's really difficult for them. So I told him that I don't think it's a trifle, and I'm very thankful that he contacted me, because for his mom, who is a provider for the family, it's not a trifle, it's a very serious issue. And thank you for calling me, and let's try to figure out, these are the steps you can make, 1, 2, 3. So on the one hand, he felt a little bit more relieved that he didn't burden me with his mom's issues. And on the other hand, he also felt a little bit proud that he was helping mom, right? So that was something that I kind of saw as a very positive experience.
I found the workshop very, very helpful. It was definitely interesting, and especially for language brokering, it was more or less a new concept to me too, the term at least. So yeah, it was definitely very interesting, and I did learn a lot from it. Well, one concept which really stood out for me in the workshops was, the whole idea of empathy versus sympathy. So yeah, I think sometimes I feel that maybe I might have had more sympathy for the students instead of real empathy, because I don't really know what they experience. If they say that, like if let's say they're from Syria and they talk a bit about the war in the country, I try to connect with them, but sometimes it's a bit hard, I think. But knowing the difference between the two, I think was definitely good to know. Yeah. Well, in terms of the language brokering module, they definitely responded well to it, because there was the I think Trina prepared this photo story or something, and helps her father. So yeah, they definitely enjoyed that a lot, because the pictures and the story itself, they can relate to it. I think they handled the receptive tasks a bit better than the productive ones, because the productive task was asking them to give advice, also for the writing, speaking and writing, giving advice to a friend on how they can help their child. So I think many of the students struggled with that. They were just not sure how to actually give advice. Yeah, they understood the concepts kind of, but in terms of giving advice to someone, it was tough for them.
I really enjoyed that aspect of the emotional wellness that you talked about, and even before we got to the language brokering part, right, and all of that. So that, I think, had to all come together. And I learned this pedagogical ways back in 2013 when I was doing my master's. So it was really nice to just review some of this information and talk about it and things, because when you're not in the research or, in the school, so you're like, forget something. So I really enjoyed the actual workshop and attending and reviewing a little bit of these things in my mind. But also because you were given the theory, we were able to connect the theory to my practice and then actually implement it, which I haven't done in terms of language brokering specifically. So for example, let's talk about this module. So the language brokering, I started asking them about translating and about how they translate things and how they feel when they ask their children for help. And some of them, I wanted to do this research myself. And I push it because I know which way I'm going to go with this. And when I asked them, do your children like translating for you? Once we got the word translate, that took a full day just to understand translate. And we're talking and translating, and people get it. It was so funny. I loved it. But they actually learned the word translate, the abstract word, which was the first step. It was great. Then I started getting deeper with things, and I said, okay, so do your children like translating for you? Are they okay with it? How do they feel? Things like that. And I know because what happens in the background, I see some things, right? And one, a few students right away, they said, oh, they love it. My 5 daughters, they love it. They help me with everything. I don't know what I would do without them. And I'm always skeptical about every answer and why they say things the way they say things. And then I had a very open student who said, no, my daughter's angry, nervous, angry, and she's showing her. And I'm like, yeah, show me nervous, angry. And I said, that's okay too. But what I'm trying to get here is that I had half of my students who almost felt shame. They would protect their children to tell me that they're okay. They will translate and they don't have a problem with it. But then you had my raw, true, whatever student, they told me the truth. They didn't think twice about it, whether it was shameful or not, or right or correct or not correct. I said, feel open. You have to tell me the truth, right? Open up, open up. It's okay if they're not okay. Some children are okay and some are not. And that's when the conversation started. Oh my goodness, everybody's giving me crazy examples of their children, like the way they act, that they're so angry. One was calling, leave me alone, mommy. And they're doing actions in the class and they're getting I had 10 people on my Zoom talking and I didn't get, I was like, one at a time, please, because they got so into it.
So in broad terms, we found that teachers who are mainly trained in teaching English found that having some training and knowledge on issues of emotional well-being and emotional wellness within their classrooms has helped. They are more careful of avoiding situations and creating environments within the classroom that can exacerbate a mental well-being and emotional wellness situation. Teachers have also said that they felt better equipped to identify a situation that requires more specialized help. In this way, we hope that teachers are better able to decipher situations where they can provide some additional support to a newcomer student experiencing emotional distress from situations where they need to enlist the help of a mental health professional. The students themselves have found that their classes are more comfortable, less stressful during the course of the pilot, and in the implementation of materials from the workshops. The results of the language brokering pilot were quite positive because at this stage we are primarily dealing with the issue of awareness, conveying evidence-based information from past studies, which was a key to making an immediate impact. So that awareness has led to teachers and students themselves changing their practices when asking a youth to language broker for them. Some students have taken extra steps to ensure their children are relaxed and comfortable when they are about to engage in a language brokering situation. Sometimes rewarding their children after a session and ensuring that it remains as positive an experience as possible.
Okay, I have a student actually who was always the last to submit their assessment paper. So, and then each time when she submitted, and she always had different excuses for doing so. At the same time, another student made fun of her by reminding her that she was always the last, regardless of whatever reason. So they were on the, they were about to argue about this. And then I just try to stop them by talking about something important for that day. I said, oh, you guys, please, next we're going to do this. And this is really, really important. And suddenly, I remembered that I've learned from the training that, you know what, we have to make sure that our students feel safe, feel welcomed, feel respected, feel really valued. And really, we should engage them meaningfully in my class, right? So then I said that, oh, okay, you know what? And let's have a group discussion about, how to make good use of what we have learned about the computer skills. How can we help each other? And then these two students, I put them in the same group. We have 4 or 5 in a group. And they had, after that, they had a good discussion about that. And they talked about each other's culture. And, so during the process of doing this, I've noticed that they actually show more respect to each other and more respect to each other's culture. I've noticed that if you make your class somewhat like a community, right? So students can help each other. So students can value each other's culture, each other's values as well, then they feel welcomed in the class.
As for the changes in my teaching, I consider the topic that was very new to me, language brokering. So I'm more attentive to these instances since that time. Try to remind my students that kids are not their employees, and that they cannot ask a lot from them. They're helpers, and it's an honor to help the family, to make the family stronger, and kind of to help them out in different situations, but they have their own life. So just keep reminding my students that they need to be appreciative and they need to be supportive. That's one thing that I think has changed. Another thing, as I mentioned, I'm trying to look at the hidden signs of distress in my students, something that I didn't pay that much attention before, but definitely the workshops were very helping and very positive and enriched my teaching experience.
Yeah, I think this Change Can't Wait workshop was very helpful, and I think all teachers should take it. So as a LINK teacher, well, because LINK is a language program, so I feel that my main role is to teach them the language skills they need. But I understand that because as a settlement program, it's important to get them to learn about Canadian culture, about Canada, and help them to settle into life here. So that involves more than just language, of course. Sometimes I do, well, I wouldn't say a counselor, but I do try to listen to some of the problems that they're having and try to help them, whether it's with day-to-day tasks like understanding a letter from the government or filling in a form for something. So sometimes I don't know all the answers, and I do have to, let's say, ask a coordinator for help or something. But I think, I do enjoy it. It is what I'm passionate about.
I think for me specifically, it was more of a validation to continue doing these kinds of things and maybe more of it specifically, right? I find that if for another instructor that didn't feel comfortable with talking about ideas and emotional wellness and things like that, I think this would be a great start to help them realize that it's okay to talk about these things and all that. But I definitely think that I was doing a little bit of that before, but this specifically was about language brokering, which I haven't done before. And so I definitely think I would use this module again. I definitely enjoyed teaching it, and I think my students did as well.